I I'm good. I'm just like you. I'm out on a long tour,
Uh,
and we're got a day off today in Nashville, one of your hometowns.
sure. Yeah.
Where are you at?
I am in San Jose, California.
Oh, that is the fucking ground zero of the Doobie Brothers.
It is. Yeah. Home. It's a home. Was a hometown gig last night. Yeah.
Wow, where'd you guys play? Shoreline or something?
Shoreline. Yeah.
What a classic venue that is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when they first built that place, believe it or not.
I do too. I'm from the Bay Area, and I remember Bill was like, "Let's build this place where the dead can play." And
hmm
remember, it was built on landfill, and the first year people would like throw their cigarette butts in the grass, and like methane would come up burning.
Yeah. It burned their picnic blankets. Yeah.
Holy smokes, man! The Bay Area. What a it's crazy to think about the Doobie Brothers. I was talking to a friend of mine about it after we saw you at the Bourbon and what is that? Bourbon and Blues tour or something?
Yeah. In Louisville.
Yeah, that thing was you guys killed 50-year anniversary tour. But I was talking to my buddy about like the Doobie Brothers are a lot like Credence. Here they are, like this California band, but they sound like this swamp boogie band from like New Orleans, you know?
Yeah. I think for what's interesting about the Doobies to me, I always was interesting to me about the Doobies, and something I always enjoyed playing with them was the diversity in the musicians that they made up such an interesting band. Pat being kind of from a more folk uh, more of a student of guitar, everything from slat key to kind of finger picking styles uh, and classical kind of guitar training. But then it had this very soulful approach to his writing, and Tom obviously having so many influences from New Orleans, and being so immersed in the blues tradition and stuff. Tom's one of the best blues guitarists I know of, and we both know a lot of great ones, but he's kind of, to me, unsung hero in just that realm all by itself, much less as a songwriter and vocalist. But so it was always interesting for me to be a part of this group because I always enjoyed. I came from an era where in the '70s, most artists covered as many bases as they could on an album. Like Moby Grape or James Taylor. You would hear everything from a kind of a calypso song to a blues, steamroller blues to Mexico to How Sweet It Is, and with Moby Grape, same thing. They have everything from a country ballad to a hard rock or blues thing, and I miss that about records today. It seems like every artist has a very homogenized style, and that's what they do. Whereas back in the '70s, it seemed like there were more artists who were more diverse in their LP productions.
Well, it was definitely the land of what I would call the deep tracks, and the deep tracks would always be so interesting back then. You get way into a record and side two, and you're like, "Wow, these guys are like going for it, totally different." I mean, even if you got into Zeppelin in through the outdoor, and they're playing stuff like Hot Dog and stuff, like
Yeah, yeah.
Zeppelin playing Hot Dog, you're like, "What?" So yeah, people really. They challenged themselves and they were influenced by all kinds of stuff, and it came out in their songwriting for sure.
Yeah, I think there was a lot more cross pollination in the '70s with pop music, and I use the term pop music loosely because I think it covers all the traditional uh, genres of music, and then of course the very pop, kind of stylistic radio, top 40 radio style of music.
You basically have been on the radio my whole life. I'm 56. I mean, first I become a huge Steely Dan fan, Doobie Brothers fan. I love '70s rock, but mostly I love a good song, and that's really what the reason we're celebrating 50 years of Doobie Brothers and also Michael McDonald being out there all these years is because of the songs. Without the songs, we wouldn't be talking about the Doobie Brothers. So songwriting is just so incredible, and to have like a different style of like Blackwater, and then Tom coming out with his, it's almost kind of biker rock. You know, it's bluesy biker rock, and then you come in and Doobies are like one of those bands like ACDC. Another singer comes in, they're bigger. And it's just wild to think about how you've been on the radio for, you know, your whole career.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that well, you know, there's not a night that, you know, used to be, I think like anybody else who you know, we started out, all of us in bands and, you know, from afar, and you know, I joined the Doobies kind of late in the game in their career. They had already had multiple platinum records, you know, before I joined them, on the strength of Tom and Pat's writing, you know. But so you know, it kind of ushered me into the radio, you know, gave me a shot at something that might have been forever elusive to me, you know, as an artist, otherwise. But you know, you all of a sudden you find yourself playing these arenas every night with 10,000 people in the seats, and you know, you wouldn't think you'd ever take that for granted, you know. And then there's comes a time when you kind of do take it for granted. You stay up a little too late. You know, put off finishing that song for another day that you need for the next record, and you know, you start to become vainly complacent, you know. And I hate to admit it, but you know, I think that happens to a lot of people, and who are given the success they always hoped for or dreamed about. You know, I grew up as a kid dreaming about making records, you know, and then, you know, you get to be our age, and you've been blessed with, for some ungodly reason, you know, certainly nothing we did to deserve this, where you're still working and you're still playing in these venues, and it's not lost on you then, you know. Believe me, at 70, we stand on that stage and we look out, and no one has a harder time believing it than us, that there are still people in the seats, and we get to play these songs one more time, and so it's made it all the more of a precious experience, I think, for us. And the audience is every bit the experience for us. You know, we would have been sick of these songs 40 years ago, you know, but every time we play them and the audience reacts with enthusiasm at the first recognizable bars of the song, uh, that whole magic thing happens again, where it's all about right now, this audience, this moment, and everybody's bringing it, you know. And I think that's the gift for us as a band. We could have all these other things in place, but if we didn't really have the respect for each other, and the love for each other, you know, that we've uh, developed over the years as friends, knowing and being able to depend on each other to, even if one of us is sick that night or whatever, nobody takes the stage and phones it in, you know, that everybody just gives it their all. And I personally appreciate that about this band more than anything, you know.
When you start out, when you're first getting into music, who is it for you? I've had, you know, hundreds and hundreds of people on here, and depending on the age they are, it's usually either the Beatles or Zeppelin. Usually they say, the Beatles played Ed Sullivan, and that was it. I wanted to start making music. But who was it for you? Because you're such a soul background, and your voice is so incredibly, you know, an R&B flavor. Was it like more Motown than Beatles?
Yeah, you know, I actually came late to Motown. My earliest real inspirations musically, you know, you know, from records, you know, that I can remember was Ray Charles. Um, he was probably the first. Etta James and Ray Charles, you know, uh, they both had those voices that they seemed to emote this yearning, this you know, this urgency that I just really drew me in, you know. And like for me, Ray Charles is still the epitome of soul music, soulful singer, you know. And it was just such a language all its own that was just so you know, elusive, and you know, I found myself kind of imitating it even as a kid. You know, I loved the way he sang, and but you know, the first bands I got into, we were of course playing everything we heard on the radio at the time, which was you know, even though those records were my early experience, Nat Cole was another one. I have to say Frank Sinatra, you know, but by the time we started bands, we were playing like the Kinks and the Beatles and the Stones, and we didn't even know that most of those songs were written by American artists,
Yeah,
uh,
covers.
covers from Motown. We just thought they were Beatles songs, you know, and so we, you know, we kind of came in through the back door of, as far as a lot of the material was concerned. I remember a friend of mine. I went to hear his band, and I was in this band that was kind of in the, you know, emulating the British invasion kind of stuff that we were playing. And he had a band that was a pure soul band. You know, it was Chuck Sabatino. He and I grew up together. He was in my band for years later, but I went to hear his band play, and they had a horn section, and they all dressed in like you know, kind of sharp clothes, and had the, you know, the pompadour haircuts. You know, they weren't trying to be the Beatles, you know. And they played all these great soul songs, and I was just smitten, you know. I thought, and then after the show, I was talking to him. I said, you know, man, I love the stuff you guys are playing. He goes, oh yeah. He goes, oh, well, you know, that stuff. He goes, you know, a lot of it's the Motown stuff. And I said, well, you know, I'm not real familiar with it. And he took me down to the record department. They were playing in a EJ Corvette store.
Oh,
Took me down to record and started playing me all these. You used to be able to test 45s in the
oh
record store,
yeah.
and so he's playing me all these Motown songs, and it just, you know, it just blew my head open. You know, I mean, I remember, I realized that, you know, this is the stuff I'd like to play. This is what I'd really like to do, you know. And it wasn't long after that that I kind of moved into that area, and in fact wound up in a band with Chuck. We played with a band in St. Louis that was probably one of the premier soul dance bands in St. Louis. You know, Jerry J and the Sheridans. You know.
Do you start out on keys or do you start out as a lead singer?
I started out just singing. You know, I started out playing piano as a kid, but you know, just by ear. I played banjo by ear, you know, just to back up my father when he sang, you know, in the saloons and stuff as a kid. But we did a lot of events around St. Louis, my dad and I, you know, and he was a pretty well-known singer. He didn't really do it professionally, but he did sing around St. Louis area quite a bit. Um, and so I had some instrumental experience, but in bands, I started out playing guitar
Wow.
in my first couple bands, just kind of rhythm guitar stuff. Um, and then I went to just singing with this soul band, um, and it was you know, I was kind of one of three singers in the band. We were like a 13-piece soul band. We had six horns. It was off. We couldn't make any money, you know,
Yeah.
but we loved it, you know. And we were the house band in a club, so that was, you know, the only way we could afford to operate like that. And today I couldn't, you know, I hate standing up and singing without an instrument because I don't know what to do with my hands anymore. You know? But back then, you know, I didn't bother me for some reason. Um, but then I, you know, when I left that group and started to, you know, perform with other groups again, especially when I moved to California, and especially when I started to write songs, I started to play piano again in whatever band I was with, because we were doing original material by then, you know. And so we were one of those bands that just kind of made the college circuit around the Midwest. We played in every college town we could find, and you know, played in all the the water holes in these college towns for, and kind of built our following that way. And then eventually, some of us, I being one of them, migrated to California.
Where when you start to sing, did you have the what I would call the quote unquote Michael McDonald sound right away, or were you learning about not knowing what key was great for you to sing in? So were you singing higher, or were you always like this smoky? This is my sound.
Um, yeah, no, I think it was a developing timbre that I had, and largely uh, facilitated by the fact that I realized early on that I always wanted to be a soul singer and kind of so I always loved the guys who could scream like Bobby Blue Bland and James Brown and Ray Charles on occasion, but and Mitch Ryder, but it hurt,
Yeah.
uh,
Oh yeah.
and a whole night long of that, you could trash yourself pretty quick. So I think my biggest development was learning to sing without hurting myself,
Right.
because if you did 5 sets a night, you wanted to be able to do it again tomorrow night, and so my style kind of developed out of preservation more than anything, and learning, kind of some of the tricks of some of the soul and gospel singers was when you hear Stevie Wonder do that big scream on, Signed, Sealed, Delivered, he's not hurting himself.
Yeah.
There's a part of his voice he can use for that makes it sound, like you know, a raunchy, emotional, scream, but he's not doing the damage that uh, someone who didn't realize that there's a way to do that without hurting yourself. So he, a lot of those singers I kind of learned by listening really closely to their records and emulating. I was an amalgam of a million singers. I loved Stevie Wonder. I loved Ray Charles. I loved Bobby Bland. I loved all those singers, Marvin Gaye, and being in top 40 bands. The deal was to sound as much like the record as you could.
Of
When we played
course.
gigs, people liked us because we actually sounded pretty close to the record, and we did everything. We did Beach Boys, Four Seasons, then all of a sudden Bobby Bland, and uh, 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 just all the stuff that was in the top 40. We covered it all, and uh, so I forgot what I was going to say, but it was by learning these records and learning the little affectations or the little embellishments that each singer did that were kind of signature to them. You kind of learn their licks. That eventually became a kind of morphed into my own style of singing. I borrowed a little bit here, a little bit there, and kind of developed my own voice.
It's funny because I sang all my life. I was a singer. I'm a comedian now, but early on, I know what you're talking about, trying to find longevity, figuring out how to sing for hours a night and being able to do it the next night. And especially back then with the Marshall stacks and
Yeah,
bad PAs, no in ears or anything. And I took a lot of lessons. I also tell people, you can't really learn to sing. What you're going to learn is how to sing long with longevity, and either you can sing or you can't. And so I took a singing lesson for a couple of years with this guy, and he finally hit it with me. He goes, "Yeah, you like Michael McDonald?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, here's how you can sing forever. If you yawn, when you're yawning, you tend to be able to, go higher, like, "Oh," like no problem." And he goes, that is how you're going to sing in higher registers and be able to do like a Michael McDonald. And when he told me that, as I yawned, I was like, oh, I get it. It's coming up from the back of my skull, from down here with no constrictions or, throat, stiff. And from then on, I got it. I didn't need to go to him anymore. If he told me that the first day, I would have been out of
you
there.
save some money, yeah.
But your voice is just, it's unreal. It's immediately recognizable, and you don't really sound like anybody but you. And it's been often imitated, and and of course, then the songwriting. And I think about the songwriting. At what point you say you go to LA, and of course, you start to play with Steely Dan, and you say, "Oh, I'm going to start writing songs." At what point do you start writing songs, and do they start to come quick? Because once you get into the doobies, it's just hit after hit after hit. So, how many songs before you actually wrote some big hits?
Well, I came to California to write songs, I wasn't really very good, at it. I wrote kind of very pop stuff, and I guess I had a kind of a dream of being like, I was a wannabe Burt Bacharach, Hal David. My songs weren't anywhere close to being that good, but I that was the songwriters I looked to, the guys that wrote for Little Anthony and Imperials, wrote "Hurt So Bad" and "Going On in My Head." Those are the kind of things I really uh, admired as far as compositions, and the Motown writers,
Oh yeah,
Nick Ashford and Valerie Simpson, um, and all the great writers.
Carol
From
King too.
Oh,
Like
Carole King, yeah,
one,
absolutely.
one one of the greatest.
But I don't know if I would have ever come to a level of that, But when I got the gig with Steely Dan, I learned something about composition that was very profound from Donald and Walter, and it was kind of that approach from a more of a jazz uh, mindset, uh, as far as chord progressions and chord voicings more than anything, that kind of opened a lot up to me. I kind of broke away from the here I go with the same chord progressions. I had a hard time breaking out of a certain mold because I was so intensely imitating Carole King and Burt Bacharach. And with Donald and Walter, learning their music just kind of opened my head up to what the possibilities were without, just listening to them from afar and imitating their songs. I kind of went away with some valuable knowledge, and I started writing a little bit again. The couple songs I first wrote for the Doobies were songs I had written in the past that were just laying around dormant, which was Taking It to the Streets and The Losing End, Taking It to the Streets. I always thought, well, that'd be, I wrote it thinking it was a gospel song, and I'd get one of my buddies to record it, with with their choir and church, and it would just, that's what the song sounded like to me, so when we first worked it up as the Doobie Brothers in the studio, because it was the only song I could think of, that I had, Teddy, our producer, really liked The Losing End. I couldn't, and Patrick liked it too, and I didn't hear that as a Doobie Brothers song to save my life, but I wasn't going to argue with them, I was thrilled that they wanted to put it on the record, and that was it came from a demo that Tyran and I had made of the song, and so then they said, "Well, what else you got?" I started to play uh, "Taken to the Streets," and uh, the band, we just started working it up right on the floor, and it all of a sudden became something else. It was very powerful, coming from this kind of rock band, attitude, and uh, you know, uh, the way they interpreted the song as a band was just a whole nother thing to me, and I, I realized for the first time that the song could be other than just a gospel song.
Well, that's the thing I think is super interesting about the Doobie Brothers is, like I said, they have this sound. So you bring in Taking It to the Streets, and all of a sudden it actually sounds like a Doobie Brothers song, because of the way they play and their groove, and just the percussion and all of that in there. Next thing you know, you're like, wow, this is an epic Doobie Brothers song.
Yeah, no, it just, we made it our own, as a band, and and I remember, about the time we were doing our finishing overdubs, we put a friend of ours on organ on the track, and that really kicked it, up a notch. And we were playing it back, a rough mix in the studio, and the intro started, and I just kind of went, wow, that sounds really good, and that's a moment that I think every songwriter dreams about, when you're sitting in a studio somewhere and your song has been recorded, and all of a sudden you hear it back, and then that first couple of bars, you're thinking, yeah, that's, better than I thought. I'll never forget that moment. Really, I've always, it's kind of like, that's the moment, the go-to moment you're always looking for the rest of your career.
Especially back then, in those old school 70s recording studios. You got the big speakers, then you got the console speakers, and maybe you got this big Neve board, and they run the 2-inch, and here comes the rough mix on the fly, and Templeman's up there like, yeah, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, it just starts coming alive, because you're in there tracking it and you're hearing parts of it and everything, and then you hear it and you're on the couch and you just go like, oh man, this is pretty big, you know.
Yeah, and again, as any band will tell you, any artist, recording artist will tell you, we all only do what we do. It's a serious mistake to ever at any point, and we all do this too, start thinking that, well, this is the shit. Yeah, and especially when you're playing in these big venues, and filling them up, and night after night, it's you're going to eventually come back to the realization that this is, kind of a small miracle that this many people are that interested in what we do, because it's not really only what we do. It's not, it's not the textbook for anything. And if you start, then you make the mistake of starting to compare yourself to everyone, and all you can do, that's a losing game.
Oh yeah.
You have to kind of just stay somewhere in there where you have blind faith in the fact that you're going to try and do a little better the next time, and hope that the audience stays with you. And so, like I say, that brings you back to here we are in our 70s on stage, and nobody's more amazed than we are that people are still coming out to see us.
What was the process of joining the Doobie Brothers? You're working with Steely Dan. You worked on Asia, which is a damn masterpiece. Which that had to be insane to be around during the recording of that record. But how does this happen? All of a sudden, you and Jeff Skunk are just. Did you audition? Was it Ted Templeman? Was it somebody that said, hey, let's try Michael McDonald in here because Tom falls ill, and all of a sudden you're doing that? How did that happen? I've never heard that story.
Well, for me, these were just those moments that happened, but for that moment, my life would have been totally different. The first one, starting with Jeff Porcaro, I met Jeff about a year before I joined Steely Dan, and and he and I hadn't really kept in contact much. I got to know Steve, his brother, and David Page. We had done a casual together, and that's when we first met. And those guys saved me. I had this gig that got kind of dropped in my lap by a girl at the time who was a bass player, and she kind of had this great gig that was on Universal Studio Lot, a rap party for a TV show, and they were going to pay a lot of money, and she had to go do an audition in Vegas for the Harry James Orchestra, and because it could have been a long-term job for her, and she had
Right.
a kid, and she needed to, she goes, look, I'm going to leave you to do this job here at Universal. She goes, I need you not to do a Michael McDonald and wait till the last minute. And of course, Mike McDonald was what she called me, because everybody called me that back then. She goes, I don't want you to do a Mike McDonald and wait for the last minute. And you're going to have to get everything in place long before this gig. You're gonna have to get PA, you're gonna have to get gear, you're gonna have to get musicians, blah, blah, blah. And I said, sure. Oh yeah, yeah. Of course I waited till like a week out and I'm panicking, and I only had like one other musician, a sax player, friend of mine, Steve Leeds. And he and I are sitting there as usual, getting stoned, listening to an album in my apartment. And I'm like, bemoaning this situation I'm in. I'm going, she's gonna kill me. That was my biggest fear, was she's gonna come back and beat the shit out of me, if I blew this gig. And I'm going, I just don't, I gotta figure out what songs we would do for 2 hours, blah, blah, blah. We need at least 2 hours. No gear, and he goes, listen, man, let me help, man. He goes, I know some cats that would probably love to do the gig. They work during the day doing sessions right now, and they're on a project, and pretty much during the daytime, and they quit, around 7, 8 o'clock at night, and they'd probably love to come do the gig. I said, well, they're session players. We're not making that kind of money. I could pay them, They go, no, they'll do it for free,
Whoa.
And I said, well, that would be too good to be true, So he goes, let me give him a call. And he goes, and my brother can get us all the gear we need. His brother was a head of a rehearsal hall, So, it was like divine intervention, the gig came off. We didn't rehearse. I said, what about rehearsal? Could they rehearse? He goes, Mike, these cats don't rehearse, they don't need to, just make some starts out and, give a rough idea of the song and the keys. And so I was left to make these chord charts and listen to these records and come up with songs for 2 hours. And then I realized I've never sang a whole gig by myself. There was always other singers in the band. And, how am I going to remember all these words, but anyway, we got through the gig, and it was a success. The crowd was happy. They didn't realize that about the third set, we were starting to repeat things and lie and say that we had a request, but we got through it. And then a large part of it was we just jammed forever. The solos were very long, and, but during the breaks, I was listening to Jeff talk about this project he was working on, and it was Steely Dan, which at that moment was my favorite band I'd ever heard, since the
Wow.
Beat, and I was so jealous that he was doing this project. I said, man, that's so incredible that you're working with those guys. I said, he goes, yeah, man. He goes, it's great. He goes, it has its challenges, but the blah, blah, blah. So about a year later, he goes, we're going to be going on the road soon after the album's done. So it was at least a year later. The same girl I was working with a lot, Randy, she said, Jeff Piccaro's looking for you. He gave me his number to give to you, or I gave him your number, but here's So I called him, and it was a number of a rehearsal hall, and he said, hey man, we're finally getting this thing together. We're finally going on the road. It's been a year. I said, oh my gosh. He goes, yeah, I know. He goes, but it sounded pretty good. He goes, we're still trying to configure the band. They don't want to use the girl singers this time, and blah, blah, blah. So they want cats who can sing and play. So I mentioned you, and, told him that, I could probably get a hold of you to come down and audition, So I was already throwing my Wurlitzer and my Pinto, and I said,
Pinto.
I'll be right there, and I came down to Modern Music, and what was an audition turned out to be at the end of the day a rehearsal. They liked what how I sang, and they liked my playing enough, to figure I could cover some miscellaneous keyboard parts, and Donald could be freed up to play some of the synth parts, and so myself and Royce Jones were the two new guys. Royce had already played with him on a tour, and I was the newest guy. So we started from that moment, that evening, rehearsing in earnest to do the tour, and wound up touring the United States and Europe with them, Europe first and then the United States,
Oh my God.
And I was like, again, one of those, like, how did I get here? This is, prior to that, I was, you know, selling pot and, on the side and
Oh
playing and
man.
playing at the Trojan Room in Glendale. I mean, it was just like things were not going that well for me. I'd been dropped from my record company deal that I came out for, and so I was, it just everything turned around in a moment. What happened later was Steely Dan broke up, and Jeff had moved on to play with like Elton John, and he was kind of a musician for hire, with the Doobies and Elton John and um, a few other acts. I think he played with the Eagles for a short time, and um, uh, he called me and said, "Hey, man, I'm out with the Doobies. I've been out with them for the better part of this year." He goes, "We got a situation where Tom's, his health is really not good, and he's going to have to take a hiatus, and the guys want to kind of at least finish out this tour, and we wonder. I mentioned you that you could probably come in and play some keyboards and sing some of the songs and cover some of the background parts." And again, I was on a plane the next day, to New Orleans, and I met up with the band, and we rehearsed for 2 days and then did the entire tour. Now, some of their songs I knew because I played them at the Trojan Room,
Yeah.
but I was didn't know a lot of it, and I had to kind of learn it very quickly, and which was something I was able to do back then, which I no longer or that I'm not that good at memorizing things anymore, but I could learn a lot of material in a short time back then, and so but I had notes all over the top of my keyboard and lyrics, and but we got through the tour, and by the end of the tour, it was gelling pretty good, and I was sorry to see it come to an end because I really enjoyed it, And Pat then through Jeff asked me to if I would be interested in staying on, and I couldn't be happier, and then eventually became part of the band.
Were you singing the Tom songs once he was out, or who was singing those?
I was singing a couple of them, and I enjoyed it so much. I miss singing those songs.
Yeah.
I was singing "Take Me in Your Arms." I was singing "Eyes of Silver" and
Oh
"Sweet
yeah.
Magazine," um, and "Long Train Running." With Pat. Pat and I usually switched back and forth on the verses and stuff. But it was great fun, and because the material was so great. It was before I started writing for them, and so I enjoyed every night, singing those songs and playing those songs, especially with the band. The difference between playing these songs with the Doobie Brothers and playing these songs with my club band friends was vast. And playing them with the Doobie Brothers was like strapping yourself to the hood of a 50s Oldsmobile, going down the highway. It's a whole lot more power and intent, in the delivery of the songs.
Now, when you first joined in, they had a B3 player, and you were just playing piano, right?
No, they didn't have a keyboard player. They
Oh,
were
they
just
didn't have a keyboard player.
no, they were just a guitar band, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I
And
didn't really play any B3. I'm playing B3 with them now, but this is the most organ I've ever played in my life, and I'm enjoying it. I've always kind of put off learning the B3 because it just seemed like such a one of those instruments that if you haven't learned to play it when you were young, you're never going to quite understand. You're going to be spending the rest of your life trying to learn it. But now I kind of enjoy every little thing I can learn about it.
oh
It's
yeah.
limited. My playing is limited at best, but I do enjoy playing B3.
I love watching Greg Allman play B3 back in the day, just
Yeah.
the way he would just do those big runs and also an incredible soulful singer. The B3 to me is just such a incredible instrument when you bring it into rock and roll, because now you have this beautiful landscape that people can sing over, and it just brings it that depth.
Yeah, it does. It adds a whole nother dimension. I remember as a kid, we had B3 players from time to time in our bands, and the only thing we always enjoyed having them, but we always realized that the B3 players is never going to carry his organ. It's all the other guys that carry the organ up 3 flights of stairs to
Yeah.
the auditorium. Uh,
Yeah, my
and
B3 player would just mysteriously disappear all the time, you
sure,
know, or he would somehow be coaching us moving it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You guys got that.
be
Oh,
careful. Yeah,
watch the corner, man. It's a beautiful cabinet there, you know.
I know. Oh,
Like,
I
hey,
know.
we get over here. He's all, I want to make sure the clearance, you know,
I have a
get you.
bad back. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, bad back. And were you messing around with any other keys in the 70s, like say Moog or clavinet and all of that? Because that was all big stuff happening. Of course, like Kraftwerk to Stevie Wonder, everybody was getting way into the keys.
Yeah, I couldn't afford any of that stuff, prior to joining the Doobies. But and with Steely Dan, I only played Whirly, and I never really uh, developed my keyboard station with that band. Uh, but with the Doobies, started playing clav more and synth, and we started to experiment with synths on the record, minute by minute, and
Of course.
yeah, and stuff. And what a fool believes in minute by minute. I played some of the synths. Billy Payne played a lot of the synths on that album with us too. Um, and of course, I got to kind of go to school on what he did, with the Oberheim, and then we wound up taking an Oberheim with us on the road. And but frankly, I never got very good at that stuff. So in fact, I think some of the synth sounds that became popular later on in early rap music, which were really kind of squirrely sounds, I think they actually sampled them off of Doobie's records. And at the time, they were considered some of the worst synth sounds ever developed, for any record. I remember our engineer, Don Landy, whenever I would do keyboard overdubs, especially with synths, Ted would make up some excuse why he had to leave, and poor Don would be left alone with me. And Don would, without reservation, make it apparent to me that this was the last place on earth he felt like being right now. He'd like sit at the console and go, "Oh, geez," And Ted would be out the door, and so I'd be sitting there for hours, like, okay, and we'd finally get an okay kind of a brass sound or string sound or something, and I go, okay, it just needs a little, and Don would go, don't touch it. And I go, no, I said, it's just a little, and then all of a sudden this lush sound would go from lush to like, and he would like, like this, and it'd be another 2 hours to try to get the sound back, and I knew one day that he had it when I was working on some sound for way too long, and he was over working on a reverb unit, and at one point, the frustration of listening to me and not being able to fix this unit, he just took it and hurled it across the room into the wall. And I realized it's probably time to call the session for the day.
Were
But
those done? Were those done over at Sunset Sound?
no, we did work at Sunset. By then I was a little better with the synths, but early on we did all our synth stuff at Amigo Studios, which was Warner Studios on
Okay.
Thompson Avenue out in the valley there.
That combination of Ted Templeman, Don Landy, that is I mean, the records that they created, if you go from Montrose to Doobie Brothers to Van Halen and stuff, it's unreal. What was Ted really bringing to the table as a producer? Was he doing a lot of arranging? Did he hear hooks and stuff? How did this go down?
Ted was kind of a renaissance producer to me, and as were a lot of those guys in that era. Russ Teidelman, Lenny Waronker. Uh, they had an amazing scope of what an artist had to offer. Ted always brought out the best in us. Whatever it is we thought we had going on with originals, we would rehearse for weeks, maybe a month, up at our house in San Francisco, and come up with these what we thought were great arrangements of the songs. And typically we'd go into the studio and Ted would just rip them apart and start from scratch. many times, you know. But the work we did was worth something. But Ted really could, you know, deconstruct things and put it back together, and where the focus would be more on what the song really had to offer, you know. And I always marveled at that, and I think we all did. I think we all felt very fortunate to have his input, and we all look forward to it. You know, he did everything from play drums on some of the tracks to,
Whoa.
you know, help come up with some of the background parts. You know, he just guitar parts. He was a real jack of all trades, even though he didn't really play any of those instruments, but he knew what worked, you know, musically. And Don was such an artistic and talented engineer. His 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 ear went so far beyond just the technical part of it. Don could take a track that, we get a track to a certain point, and we'd leave it with him to mix. He would do these he would run up in these rough mixes, and he would decide what stayed and what went, on certain versions of the mix. And he would, in a way, kind of arrange the song himself, omit certain parts that he thought were, getting in the way of the record having a real sonic, something to offer sonically and for radio. And, we were always amazed, when we heard the mixes, it would be like, wow, that's again, something else, you know what I mean? And then when they mastered it, the mastering always made a big difference, everything they did really brought the music we were making, to the next level, in very noticeable ways for us,
I don't have a lot of time left with you, but I do want to ask you this because I was a massive Van Halen fan. Can you run me through what it was like? You were asked by Ted to come in and work on this song, I'll Wait, on the 1984 record, which is a fantastic song and features tons of synthesizers. But it's tough to really get any kind of real answers out of David Lee Roth, because if you go like, where'd that vocal come from? He'll be like, oh, well, I was on the sky and the moon dropped. The next thing you know, it's planets, and you're like, what? But what was it like to go in and work with Dave on All Wait? Is the track done and he has some lyrics? How did that happen?
Yeah, the track was done, and Eddie did all the synths on that. The band actually had cut the track, and they just didn't have a melody or a lyric. It was just kind of the track. And Ted gave me a copy of it. He said, don't play this for anybody, but we see if you can write a lyric. And and apparently that became, you and David get together and come up with a lyric so that he feels good with it, to sing it. And so I got together with David at Ted's office, and my experience was, um,
I mean, was he just bouncing off the walls like, nah, man, that ain't cool? Or what was he like?
he seemed okay with it,
Yeah,
when we didn't really make any real changes. So they just kind of ran it by him, and they went in and recorded it. And I put it down on a cassette with we played the cassette of their track, and
right.
I sang over it for him. And I think, and so that he went away with that, and they cut the song, and the record came out, and lo and behold, I wasn't on the writing credits.
Yeah, I had no idea that you wrote it until a week ago.
Yeah. Well, you would have never had that idea had I not bitched and moaned about it, but
Wow.
eventually we worked that out, and those guys sold so many records. For my one fifth of the share of the record,
Yeah.
I probably made more money from that song than I made from all the Doobie songs, at that point. I mean, they were selling crazy amounts of records,
That's what
Uh,
I read, and I was like, "Wait, Doobie Brothers had mad hits," but that's
no, yeah, we well, we did, and we did great, but Van Halen, that was that new generation of like, oh, we just sold 100 million units, and on the last record, and we only sold 90 million units on this record, so they're going to drop us.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
before that, if you sell platinum, you were like the shit. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, totally.
but anyway, uh, it was a great experience. I always loved Van Halen. I remember the first time we heard Van Halen. Pat and I were in the studio talking to Ted. I believe it was Pat and I, and yeah, it was. And Ted came in. He goes, "You got to listen to these kids." And he had their demo and it was Pretty Woman,
Oh wow.
which came out much later for them. But one of the first demos they turned into Warner Brothers was Pretty Woman, and here's Eddie, playing a version of Pretty Woman that Roy Orbison never dreamed of.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
was crazy, and we are just like, oh my God. And it was, I think it was, You Really Got Me Too was the other song they did by the Kinks.
yeah.
And that was a couple of things that were on their demo. And we were blown away by Eddie's playing. We'd never heard anything like it, and of course, the rest is history.
Oh yeah. I got to tell you, man, I thoroughly enjoyed seeing you last week. I had not seen the Doobie Brothers in maybe about 30 years. I grew up in the Bay Area, saw the Doobie Brothers a lot, and being in that Bill Graham scene and the Bammies and everything, and just New Georges and all of that rock and roll in the Bay Area, and to watch the Doobie Brothers here I am in St. Louis or Louisville, and I had the biggest smile on my face, and I was with Marcus King, and we were just going like, "This is just incredible." The songwriting's just smoking and just still dominating the radio dials to this day. Your voice was killing. I love there was a couple times you were just even kind of like, I'll really show you. You're like, yeah, we're like, yeah, he's letting us know. I still got this up here. It was just great. And congratulations on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, that COVID kind of robbed you of the glorious night of that. It would have been great to just see, right when it did happen, but Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Grammys, and a long career, and 50-year anniversary of the Doobie Brothers out right now. Go see these guys, everybody. How long does the tour go?
We'll be out till October 12th. Is our last show in Nashville, where you're at today, and then we go out again next year for some dates overseas. And so we're hoping that happens. With the COVID thing, you never know. It's kind of coming and going right now. So we're hoping that everything stays status quo, and we're able to get overseas and play a bit. It will be in the Pan Pacific area, like Asia, Japan, Australia, those are in New Zealand, and then from there, later in the summer, we'll hopefully do Europe and come back home.
That's great, man. If I'm in Santa Barbara, I'll hit you up. I do comedy, so I'm always all over the place. Or
All right.
if you're in LA and want to come by the Comedy Store sometime, let me know.
I'd
Come in
love
and
to.
yeah, get a laugh. And did you ever used to go to the Comedy Store back in the
Well,
70s, 80s?
I did, and my daughter and I, go to, and when she was living in New York for a while, we would go to some comedy stores there in
Oh,
New York.
the Cellar and stuff.
See the seller, yeah, and she loves that stuff. So it would be a great excuse for me to get down to LA and take her out to dinner and come see you.
Oh, please let me know, man, as my guest anytime. And thank you so much for doing the show. It was an honor to have you on, man.
Thank you.
We were rocking the Doobies last night at a Waffle House at 3 a.m. in Indy. We put that on, man, minute by minute. We were just like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, we're still frequenting places like that.
Yeah. I
Well,
appreciate you, man.
I did want
Yeah.
to mention too, Jeff Baxter has a record out right now.
Oh, yeah.
I'm having a senior moment here. The speed of he's going to kill me. But it's a great record.
Yeah.
I got to work on it a little bit with him, and so for your listeners, if they want to check out what Jeff Baxter's up to, he's got a
Yeah.
brand new.
Also, I love Soul Speak. What a great bunch of versions of like the Stevie Wonder tune and Into the Mystic. And what a
I think,
great record this is, man. And also your Motown 1 and 2. Those are great solo records too. So
thank
dig deep into his solo career. There is some incredible songs, great vocals, and it runs deep out there. Thank you, my man.
thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. Take
Thank you so much.